This is an ad. You're hearing this ad on Jake Landau's podcast. Would you like to put an ad in this place? Email ads at jakelandau.ca and talk about ad rates to put your words in my mouth. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Jake from the future. In this episode, I lost count and call this the 42nd episode. You didn't miss one. This is the 41st. Sorry about that. Enjoy the show. It is Sunday, December 7th, and it's getting pretty late with Jake Landau. We have a returning guest for you. Some say he's the prototypical guest. He was the guest on our first episode, and now he's the guest on our 42nd episode. His name is Jeremy Appel from Read the Orchard, and it is a pleasure to have him back on the show. Jeremy, thanks for coming back.
Yeah, great to be here, as always. Hard to believe it's been 42 episodes. That would mean you've been doing this for almost a year now.
I know this has been going on pretty long now, I guess. I'm pretty happy with how things are going. I know some other people who have tried starting up podcasts this year haven't exactly had the best or similar luck with keeping it going that long. So I'm happy. I'm doing good. I'm having a good time. I'm glad that I'm still making episodes and that we'll still be making more episodes into the next year, hopefully. Hopefully you'll be in one of those episodes next year for us too. I guess we'll call it season 2, I guess. This isn't our last episode of the year, but next week will be. I don't think anyone's listening on Christmas Eve.
Yeah, because you do an episode consistently every week. I've noticed, or mostly consistently every week.
Yeah,
which is an impressive feat. Because I can't even do that.
I know
I
it's a pain because it's like, well, not a pain, but like you do actually have to book a guest each week. It wouldn't be as impressive if it was just me talking to myself for an hour. But yeah, the consistency I think is just really the key part of podcasting. And I mean substacking in general, to be honest, you would know that as well. Like if people are subscribing, especially if they have a paid subscription, I think the one thing they want is just consistent output of content. I think the last time I missed an episode was just because I was at a wedding in Montreal and I was not interviewing live from there, especially because I was in the wedding party. So that would be a bit of hard double duty.
Yeah, it's yeah, you definitely want to give the people what they're paying for, especially when I get an influx of new subscribers for whatever reason. It's like, all right, I gotta find some content for them. And podcast is a nice way to do that.
I've noticed that like for the headline topics I'll use in the back half, usually it's something I know I'm not necessarily going to write a full column about, but it's worth discussion. And also the fun part of doing it here on the podcast is there's someone who is not me to talk about it.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I've been very inconsistent with my podcasting this year. But I've been working on a fairly big project that is going to take up most of my energies between now and the end of January. So yeah, and then once that happens, I'll be back and have you on the podcast, because you've had me on yours now, several times, and I think I've only had you on that one time.
I think I forgot whether I've been on your show one time or two times, but yeah, I'm definitely happy to return the favor whenever. It's always fun to do a podcast exchange, I guess, or swap. I did that with Nuka Duckrube from the Radical Center a few weeks ago, and that was fun. But I know what you're doing recently. In addition to that, you recently, I think, you've taken a position with Alberta Native News as part of the local journalism initiative.
Right. So it's actually a freelancing position that I've had with Native News now for several years.
So not recently. My apologies.
Yeah, I mean, uh yeah, I've been doing work for them for a while. They are kind enough to allow me to reprint it on my Substack, which makes sense because it's an LJI. They use the LJI funds for freelancers,
Right.
including myself. You're the second person actually recently to congratulate me on my new job that isn't new and it's not.
I think it's just because I've
It's more of a gig than a job,
yeah,
but
I think it's just because like on your Substack, which is where I read the piece, it's just because I've started seeing more pieces like that have been reshared and not your Substack originals. So that might be it, why I thought it was a new thing. But it is funny I'm not the only person who thought it's new.
yeah, I mean it gets picked up pretty those stories get picked up sometimes pretty widely. I mean um they've been reprinted like CTV online and um um I think the Star and the Globe
Yeah,
before.
so they get like pretty widely
So
circulated.
yeah, so it's a good gig. I like doing. I learn a lot for sure about indigenous issues. And people who are indigenous have told me that the reporting's good and it's very sensitive and
That is the barometer you have to meet, so I'm glad you are meeting it. I'm glad they're happy.
yeah. Yeah, because often sometimes, especially when I'm dealing with something like a missing and or murdered indigenous person, say, or
Right.
someone who isn't missing and murdered, but an indigenous person who died before
Something with a lot of
their
cultural
time.
sensitivity. You just want to make sure, as
Yeah,
you know,
and obviously that stuff like it's still when an indigenous person dies, say in a car accident or something, and there's the suggestion that there might be a cover up or something, right? Like there are resonances with the murdered and missing indigenous people that um
right.
requires you. It's something to be aware of when you're writing about these issues, especially as someone who's not indigenous,
Right. It's
right?
like, as the
Where
white guy in
I'm
the
like
room,
I'm
you want to make sure you're conscious of these things, that they're in the front of your mind when you write about them. Like, it's the same way I do it when I write about these kinds of topics.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a lot also with Métis and First Nations politics. There's a lot of um people accusing each other of not being legitimate
Right.
representatives, and that's where it gets quite messy. And
Oh,
that
yeah,
for me,
because
it's just like,
you,
all right, what does each side say? It's not like
yeah.
it's totally not my position to say who's right, who's wrong.
Exactly, but
Um,
it puts you in a weird position because and I know I've there's another reporter for APTN, Jennifer L, and I know she's a
is she
reporter.
a reporter?
I think she's a reporter, but she's been banned
I thought
from.
she was like more.
All I know is that she isn't able to go to the Saskatchewan Métis Nation anymore to cover it. And she's not the only journalist who's been banned from attending. Uh, but she's one of the people they supposedly represent, and as a journalist, she should have the ability. There, you want, and for her, as someone I get who's actually in that community, it's a different story, but like nonetheless, like conflict within the community is, it's hard to report on normally. It's especially hard to
Yeah,
report on when you're not in that community, because you don't want to take the wrong side, definitely, but you also don't
yeah,
know if it's your place to take any side.
yeah. I mean, she's First Nation, if I'm not mistaken. She's Cree.
Hmm.
um and so there's that level too, right? And you saw that with the agreement Trudeau entered into with the Métis Nation of Alberta, the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan, and the um Manitoba Métis Federation, I believe, to recognize these organizations as like the legitimate governments of Métis people in each of those
Recognize
provinces,
them and also
because they're
provide some funding, if I'm correct.
yes, and just have like to treat them like they are like legitimate orders of government, like First Nation or province, in that uh I mean, in addition to making Métis organizations that aren't part of that fold upset, it also pissed off First Nations, and I believe it was the chiefs of treaties 6, 7, 8. One of those, I think one of those like confederations released a statement being like, remember, like, you're on our, this is our land, it's not yours, that you are still settlers. And I think for us as settlers, we don't necessarily, we see Métis people look, as indigenous as First Nations people,
But
or
for them,
Inuit
it's
peoples.
complicated because
Yeah,
Métis people
and
wouldn't
it is
yeah,
complicated. It is. I
because
mean, it is, because again,
I
it's not
mean,
like what.
put plainly, Métis people wouldn't exist without settler presence. At the same time, that doesn't mean that these human people are bad for existing or that there's something wrong with the uniquely Métis culture.
Right.
Yeah, which it's complicated, like especially because like there's also shades of like is the settler government creating a parallel indigenous organization to try and strip rights away from the other one, which I know there's also the
Exactly.
shades of hereditary versus elected chiefs in different nations, like
Yeah.
big, and hereditary can be a misnomer because they do a lot of the time actually have a practice for picking the hereditary chiefs.
Yeah. And then sometimes Indigenews has picked up at least one story of mine recently, which is cool because they're of course indigenous media outlet, and so if they
Well, by the
like
name
the
I
work I'm doing,
assumed.
then yeah, yeah, and they're indigenous run, because Alberta Native News actually is not. The people who run it are actually Jewish.
Hmm.
Like they own the paper and they publish it, and they try and prioritize, of course, having indigenous reporters, as they
Is
should,
like
but it isn't always
editorial
easy.
run by indigenous people at ANN?
No,
Hmm.
no, it's not. Of course, I mean, they do uh have a lot of indigenous reporters that are, of course, the priority for um covering indigenous stories, and I think that they have a lot of input and sway. Like, because again, it's all freelancers, essentially, right? It's like a community newspaper that's free, especially here in Edmonton, where there are a lot of indigenous folks living in the city. There are like old school like newspaper boxes, and you can just pick up copies for
Yeah,
free
I'm
at like random
familiar with
places.
that like kind of community paper. Like you
Yeah.
pick them up in like the local like community touchstones, like the restaurants and the grocery stores that everyone goes to.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And then sometimes I'll be somewhere and I'll be like, "Oh, Native News." I'll have to pick up a copy and
It's kind of like
see
the
if I'm in
indigenous
there.
equivalent of how like you could pick up like the Canadian Jewish news in the hall of a random synagogue for free.
Right, but CJN isn't in print anymore, is it?
Not anymore. See, you used to be able to, but I do actually wonder if the business model for ANN is actually inspired by the CJN, because now that you say the owners are Jewish, I'm like, huh, maybe they were trying what already worked.
Well, yeah, and they do own the Alberta Jewish News. Actually, that's sort of
Oh
like they
yeah,
used to own,
yeah, they're
like the
trying what
family,
works.
the yeah. I mean, the family business, and I don't think they mind me, talking about this. If they do, and they're listening, I'm sorry. But they used to own a lot of like different community newspapers in Edmonton, And now I think they're just down to the Alberta Native News, which sorry, Alberta Jewish News, which used to be the Edmonton Jewish News, and then they purchased the Calgary Jewish News in
and
like
merge them.
2020 and merged them, and then the Native News, and I think that's it now. They sort of
Oh, yeah, so it's
sold off all the other community papers they
so community
owned.
paper management is kind of just the family
Yeah,
business. Oh,
and
I
yeah,
don't
and
know why
again,
they wouldn't want you to say that. Like that sounds pretty
yeah, and
innocuous.
and also I think because they've been open about this, they're trying to find an indigenous person to sell native news to.
That is good.
Um, yeah, but that isn't always
Even if
the
they
easiest
continued
thing.
to own it, having like indigenous run editorial for me is like the big part that would be ideal for kind of like you get what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, it seems like a well run. And like, so how are you the only person funded for the local journalism initiative? How many reporters is that getting them?
I think it's just the slate of freelancers who are funded through LJI.
Ah,
As I understand it, like if you open the paper, like local journalism initiative appears under like multiple bylines. I remember once another journalist in Alberta asked me about that. He's like, "Are you how many like?" Because I think they assumed that it was to hire full time report that LJI was to hire full
admittedly,
time
that's what I
reporters.
thought it was. I didn't realize it was subsidizing freelancers.
Yeah, um, but it does include freelancers, especially in underserved communities. So the indigenous communities in Alberta, right? That's sort of what the LJI is particularly geared towards. um and yeah, I mean there are multiple and again, because it's like sort of like a roster of freelancers, it like sort of ebbs and flows based on the it's a monthly paper, so it depends on the month. But yeah, I mean there are several of us.
Hmm. And the local journalism initiative, it's that program set up back by the Trudeau government. I forget which year. And it has it. I'm guessing it has been genuinely helpful to a lot of community papers. But do you think it's been enough to stem the tide of like the decline of community news?
It's a very good question. I would say no, it's not enough to just stem the decline. But I do think it has been a very useful program, especially for like smaller community newspapers like Alberta Native News, right? That it's a struggle as it is, I think, to get advertisers and as a free newspaper. I mean,
Yeah.
newspapers that aren't free, they don't make that much off subscriptions. It's all about the
I
ads,
mean,
right?
even in
And
Toronto, it's like the free newspapers you used to be able to pick up in a subway station. They all died because there was no way to keep them profitable. Like, there was
well,
one,
yeah, if memory serves, there was that because I remember getting 24 hours for free on newspaper, which was The Sun
yeah,
when I lived in
there was
Toronto,
twenty-four
and
hours by
Metro,
the
which was the
Sun,
Star.
and the Metro, which was the Star, and then there was a merger of them and then it closed. They stopped it anyway.
Right. They swapped them and then closed them both down. Which yeah was very shady business practice. And I guess that's the problem with LJI is I know it has also been going to like um at least it's right, because I believe it started during the pandemic,
Hmm.
right? To sort of stop newsrooms from laying people off. Because I was laid off, right, from Medicine Hat News. Um and then I got a new job in Calgary and I moved away, but they eventually were able to hire someone to replace me because of LJI. But I mean, in a case like that, I mean, Medicine Hat News. I mean, it's a small newspaper, right? But it's owned by a fairly big company. Sorry, not Black Press. Glacier Media, which owns. I mean, they own the Victoria Times Colonist, right? It's not like a small company by any stretch of the imagination. In
No.
fact, the guy who owns the company, David Radler, was used to be Hollinger guy who worked with Conrad Black, and that he actually snitched on Conrad Black. Um, for a lesser prison sentence. So I mean, this guy, going to the government with his cap in hand for money. I mean, to
Yeah.
me, seems quite inappropriate. But definitely for community newspapers, I think CJN as well. I believe has an LJI reporter, or did. He's not a good reporter, but Mitchell Konsky, I believe his name is, who wrote some pretty embarrassing stuff about these like vigilante organizations in Toronto.
Oh, the
Um
ones associated with, okay, I was like, oh, it's a
uh,
bit harsh to say he's not very good, but if he was like rating embarrassing stuff, like defending,
yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah, like
yeah,
uniquely
the
egregious.
for
Obviously, I
context
mean,
at
CJ.
home, for folks who aren't aware, there are armed groups of thugs associated with Jewish ethnic supremacist terrorist groups, and if you thought that Jewish ethnic supremacist was a joke, no, somehow these people are actually real. They have like a
Yeah, I mean,
yellow
well,
flag with a black star of David on it, and if you have with a fist, and if you ever see that,
yeah,
just don't walk, run. Like they're not
yeah,
mentally stable people.
yeah.
I'm
The
a
cops
Jew,
are in.
Jeremy's a Jew, and these people freak us both the fuck out.
And I feel somewhat bad for naming that reporter because I think he seems like he's like a young guy, like maybe just out of journalism school, who I'm sure does have some biases. All I mean, all but maybe I should cut him some slack. But it was a really egregious piece. And it got because I mean, the thing about LJI, right, is it serves as this like wire service, right?
Right.
And so it got picked up by mainstream news outlets. And a lot of people don't realize when a mainstream news outlet, whether it's City News or the Globe and Mail or whatever, when they run a wire story, that it's not by that news outlet, right?
I
And so
know.
people will say, "Oh my god, I can't believe." And yes, it's still they're deciding to publish this article. So I think I used to be one of those people who was like, "No, you idiots! It's a Canadian press story. It's not a Toronto Star story." But it's also like they're publishing this stuff,
Yeah, you've
agreeing to
made an
publish this
editor.
stuff, and
You're not forced at gunpoint to run every story that comes down the wire. Like, if you
yeah.
don't like
I
a
mean,
story from the wire service, don't run it.
I will say in the case of Medicine Hat News, like on their website, it's automated. They just
Uh,
have stories from the wire. But in the newspaper, the stuff they decide to put in the newspaper, like on their like national page or
I
provincial.
would not have automated publishing without any editorial oversight of random articles on my news site.
Well, certainly not LJI stuff, right?
Yeah,
But
but I even if it's a wire.
CP, I mean,
With a
that
wire cert,
obviously,
I'm thinking like to the 70s from this slide from an IBM management presentation where it said a computer can never be held responsible, so a computer must never make a management decision. And I just think that whenever I hear like automated anything with like publishing some communications piece to the public, I'm like, who are you going to hold responsible when something wrong happens?
yeah, I mean, and that just speaks. I mean, we're only going to have more of that in the coming years,
Oh
not
yeah, we're
less.
we're in wire
With
service hell right now.
AI, which yeah, but I mean, Canadian press, there is like they have there is a sort of a degree of editorial rigor.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not saying that wire
Even
services don't know what they're doing. Like Canadian Press, Associated Press, Reuters, like they have editorial standards. I just mean like I would like more local reporting so that not every community paper is just reprinting the same wire service story.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, and I think that's made it easier for newspapers to justify layoffs when it's like, well, especially, I mean, I was talking with I remember years ago I was talking with Graham Thompson, who's a great political columnist here in Edmonton. Used to be at the Journal. Now he writes mainly for the Tyee, sometimes CBC, the Star. And I remember him telling me that he like back in the 80s, he'd been at the Journal forever, and he was in Moscow reporting for the Edmonton Journal. They had like a reporter in Russia, which is, I mean, unheard of today. I mean, the Globe and Mail is the only Canadian newspaper, for all its flaws, that has foreign bureaus that outside of the United States. The Star used to. Now it's just they've got a couple of reporters in the States. The Globe,
and being in the States is different to being off continent, or even
right, exactly. Like,
yeah.
and even then, I mean, it's like, the Globe has one reporter, who's a very good reporter, Jeffrey York, in Africa, right? He's based in Johannesburg, covers the entire continent. Now, mind you, they have stringers, I'm sure, in other African nations. Like, he's well connected,
right?
And he's a good journalist, one of the best. And James Griffith as well covers like all of Asia. And then you have like Mark McKinnon, who's kind of like a floater. But and because the Star and the Post, and not to mention all the other post media papers that are more local in focus: Ottawa Citizen, Edmonton Journal, Calgary Herald, Vancouver Sun. They could just be like, well, we'll just pick up the AP stories or
right.
the Reuters stories, or
and the thing none of them seem to understand is that if I can just read the story from the Wire service, I have no need to subscribe to any of their papers. I should just be subscribing to the Wire service.
Yeah, and I mean, it's true also with that. I mean, they used to also, I mean, the Journal and the Herald, they used to have reporters in Ottawa, and the Herald used to have a reporter in Edmonton, right, to cover the legislature. And now it's just like it's a combination of, when it comes to post media, it's just like, oh well, we'll just run national stories either from the Wire or from the Post, and we can, in the Herald, can just run provincial stories or legislature stories from the Journal, if not the CP, right? So it narrows the options, right? And
right.
And again, I know several great reporters who I consider friends at CP, but it's always good to have more voices, more just different angles on stories. Like,
right,
you can't when you're doing a story, especially for a newspaper, and it needs to be tight, it needs to be like 800 words tops, right?
I'm lucky if I get 800.
You're gonna leave certain things out. You have to prioritize some things over others. And the good thing about having a range of reporters covering the same
they
thing,
make different editorial decisions.
In by nature. And I mean, you can still do that, right? I mean, there's CBC, CTV, Global, the Journal, CP, City, but
it's getting harder.
I mean, yeah, and in print, really, if you're talking just about print, like a physical paper newspaper, it's just the Journal running its own stories and stories from the Herald and CP, right? Now online, you've also got CBC and the private networks, and it's not ideal.
No.
But so I think that's also a risk of LJI. But it is also responding to a reality, right? And I think it is overall a good example of the government stepping in when there's like a market failure and trying to stabilize things, especially for I mean again, because like there's always going to be an Edmonton newspaper, right? There's always going to be national papers, but for like community newspapers, like Alberta Native News and other community publications. I mean, um, when
There's
there's like a glut in advertising because everyone just wants to advertise on Facebook or Google, I mean, those are the papers that get hit the hardest too.
Yeah, and just because there isn't a profit motive for them to exist doesn't mean that there isn't a societal motive for them to exist. It is good for the community to have news, so if it is not profitable for the free market to do by itself, the government should subsidize it.
Yeah, exactly. And like even like places like Red Deer. I mean, the Red Deer Advocate's like a good newspaper. They cover a lot of stories that might get missed in central Alberta. And I mean, Red Deer by Ontario standards is like tiny, right? It's like 100,000 people, if that. But in Alberta, it's the fourth biggest city. Used to
Yeah.
be third, now left.
Yeah, it's all a matter
So
of scale. For Alberta, it's like it's a very significant community.
yeah.
Yeah. And
But anyways,
yeah.
I think you wanted to talk about the story that I wrote.
Yeah, a little bit about that before we go into our back half here. But this one story that you did write under the local journalism initiative for the Alberta Native News recently,
Mhm.
you called it Indigenous Self-Determination and a Separatist Threat. And it was about a presentation by a Native Studies scholar at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, Matthew Wildcat. And it was an Indigenous realist view, he called it, of the separatist movement at this year's Parkland Institute conference. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little about that.
So the Parkland Institute is this left-leaning think tank out of the University of Alberta that came together in the 90s and really drives conservative governments here insane. I
That's a
know
noble profession.
I know Danielle Smith during her leadership campaign a few years ago specifically spoke of maybe looking into their funding because they're publishing a lot of anti-Alberta content. In her words, very critical of the oil sands, for example, which is sort of this third rail in Alberta politics. Healthcare privatization, um, neoliberal tax policies and all that. And every year they have an annual conference, and it's really great. Because it's a good combination of like sort of liberal, like progressive, so like liberal and also more radical speakers. So this year they had the keynote was Peggy Nash, who is from your neck of the woods, my former neck of the woods. Former NDP MP from Parkdale High Park. Rachel Gilmore also spoke, who's great. Matthew Wildcat, Harsha Walia, who's fantastic. I highly recommend her book, Border and Rule. Really great activist and academic. Um, and very interesting stuff. And so Matthew Wildcat, and so I actually spoke at the conference a couple years ago on a panel about independent media with Sharon Riley from the Narwhal, and Avi Lewis was the keynote speaker that year actually.
Mm.
And But in the 2 years since then, I've sort of gone as they'll give me a media pass to give them press coverage because the conference doesn't usually get much press. And I know last year I went and I did something for the newsletter strictly because John Valent was the keynote, who wrote a great book, Fire Weather, about the Fort Mac wildfire in 2016. And then this year, I was looking through the speakers and Matthew Wildcat talking about Alberta separatism, and I've been covering for Alberta Native News a lot about the backlash towards this the separatist movement and Danielle Smith's sort of mainstreaming of it in a way I'm not sure any other premier has done. um Kenny would probably be a close second, but he was always in one of the reasons why he failed, which you'd know as someone who read the book I wrote, is that there was no or else for Kenny. It was just like, yes, Alberta needs more power. We need to reform equalization. We need to do all these things that separatists complain about. But if the feds didn't do that, he had no plan for after. Whereas Smith is like, yeah, this is your last chance, or we're going to separate, right?
Right. And they both came from different political positions, because Kenny, before he led the UCP, was a federal cabinet minister. He ran immigration. And people can read your book, Kennyism, to read about the awful shit he did there.
Right. And in less than a couple years, they'll be able to read my new book on Daniel Smith. That is the major project I've been working on.
Every time Albertans pick a new conservative leader, Jeremy is going to write a book about them.
I think Danielle is going to be the last one. It's just, she's a very interesting figure in her own right. But in many ways that the separate, I mean, First Nations have been really leading the opposition to separatism in Alberta, I would say, and because it's quite clear cut. I mean,
it's a direct challenge to their treaty rights.
Yeah, exactly. The treaties, and I mean the court, I believe the Court of King's Bench just ruled the other day that actually asking whether Alberta should separate in a referendum is unconstitutional, because creating an international border around Alberta would split some First Nations.
I think the ruling was that there couldn't be any referendums to change the Constitution under the law, so it violated the law as written. And that's why they're now changing the referendum law to take out the requirement that it doesn't change the Constitution. But also, it means a referendum doesn't really mean anything, because the treaties with Indigenous nations are foundational parts of the Canadian Constitution, and those treaties were with the Canadian Crown before Alberta was ever created as a province. Though the land which Alberta exists on is a separate legal concept from the government of Alberta as a province. And I'm sure technically they could vote for their province to leave the country, but I don't think they can take any land with them.
Right.
Assuming we're actually following the rules and people aren't just using force.
Yeah, and they would have to, and I mean, the separatist leaders, I mean, most of them, they just won't talk about, what happens with the First Nations. And
well, I mean,
some of them
like the Republican Party of Alberta, and that name by itself, led by an American expat, should put the fear of God in all of us. But he says, according to your piece, that he doesn't think First Nation reserves or treaty rights would exist in an independent Alberta, because everyone would have a seat at the table. And you compare it to the assimilationist policy of Jean Chrétien's white paper in 1969, which would have just completely erased all Aboriginal or Indigenous rights from the and it's a sort of, it's the I don't see color of anti-racist policy. I'm like, unfortunately, the racists do see color. And that's the problem.
And yeah. And this goes back to a lot of like the Calgary school stuff, right? Like Tom Flanagan, who, before he was saying that, people shouldn't be imprisoned for, looking at child porn. He was a firm advocate of just, because he's like a huge neoliberal ideologue. So the solution to everything is just like more market.
So literally the joke about how libertarians just want child porn.
Yeah, I mean, that's not exactly what he said.
No, but
it does kind of fit the stereotype.
Yeah, a little too close to the stereotype. It's like, I think
but
the government shouldn't be allowed to make laws. What law do you have a problem with?
well,
Uh,
a few, um, and I um yeah, and so it's this idea that like there shouldn't be any like collective rights, that it's just individual rights that we need, um that will allow people to flourish, like, in the market, type of stuff. And so I think that's where a lot of that comes from. um and yeah, I mean, there's one Jeffrey Rath, who's sort of a comical, like almost like Cohen Brothers esque character, this lawyer who represented the Alberta Prosperity Project, which is sort of the big separatist organization that is pushing for this referendum. He represented them in court, and he because he knows the law about First Nations quite well, he's saying, well, we're going to protect treaty rights in independent Alberta. It will be the same treaties. We'll just have to negotiate it, them being with the new sort of sovereign and not the. But I mean, if you look at just this year, he's been fined thousands of dollars for his dealings with a couple First Nations, and yeah, almost $11,000 for in one case, Thunderchild First Nation in Saskatchewan fired him, and then for 6 months he refused to hand over documents for their court case to their new lawyers, and was going around saying that he was
still their lawyer.
Thunderchild First Nation.
Yeah. So,
And
which is a no-no for folks at home. If you're fired by your client as their lawyer, you can't refuse to hand over documents to the new lawyer. It's legally required of you, and you can get in deep shit with the bar. And he got fined $10,000 because he did get in deep shit with the bar.
Yeah. And it's interesting too. There's also so this is all like stuff Matthew Wildcat was talking about at this Parkland Institute lecture, just to sort of
bring it
keep
back
his
around
voice in the conversation. And basically his point is that a lot of the conversation about Alberta separatism has focused on, can they separate, right? Can they even do that, right? Which is classic, very liberal, like, small L liberal, like thinking about norms and procedures, and you can't do that.
The rules say a dog can't play basketball, but the
exactly.
dog is dunking on you as you try and get the ref to stop the game.
Yeah, and it's like every First Nation in Alberta either has come out itself, or an organization that it's a part of. So whether it's the Treaty 8 First Nations of Alberta, Confederation Treaty 6 First Nations, or Treaty 7 First Nations, have said that they're against this. That, and it's not, he makes clear, this isn't because they love Canada in how they've been treated by the Canadian state historically and in the present, but just it's an Indigenous realist.
It's that pragmatically the other option would be even worse.
Yeah. It's like, we're not thinking about this decolonized future. We're thinking about the immediate threat now. And what is the lesser evil? Is it
frustrating for them to have Canadian Federalists from across the country using them as like the excuse? Like, you talk about the small L liberals saying, oh, you can't do that because it would violate Indigenous people's rights. But those same people don't really care about Indigenous people's rights unless they can use it as a cudgel against another white person.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would imagine, it depends on the First Nations leader you talk to. You look at stuff like, say, oil and gas development, and there are First Nations that support it. A lot of them in Alberta, especially southern Alberta, right? There are those who oppose it, especially on like unceded lands in BC. There are also those who support it in BC, with like LNG and also like the TMX pipeline. And then you have like First Nations in Alberta, like Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation and Mikisew Cree First Nation, who are both very critical of the impact of the tar sands on their communities and their health, and not just their land, but also like physical health, like elevated rates of certain cancers in Fort Chipewyan. But they're also like, hey, we support developing the tar sands. Like, I mean, there is money in it for First Nations, right? There are economic benefits, right? It's trade-off. But it's just the way it's been done has been just completely cavalier and completely without regard for its impact on First Nations communities. And so I use that as like an analogy for the way I think for many First Nations leaders would look at how Canadian Federalists, you could say, use them as a pawn in shutting down conversations about Alberta separatism. I think some would say, well, we're making the same arguments, right?
I can see the same thing in like environmentalism as well, where it's like there's almost like that noble savage stereotype. Well, like they're indigenous, so they must care about the environment and be opposed to pipelines and oil and gas. But as you've just described, there are communities that want that money, even if they know it may have bad consequences for their health or for the environment. So, like,
or just want they don't want to stop development. They just want it to maybe be slowed down or done in a more responsible way, right? And I think I remember me coming from Ontario, and this just have been me being ignorant. But a decade ago, coming from Ontario and thinking, yeah, that all these First Nations are against, the tar sands and LNG and all that. And it's like, well, no, it's a lot more complicated than that, right?
Yeah.
Like
when they are clearly and vocally themselves saying they're opposed to something, then they're opposed to it. But you shouldn't be an environmentalist or care about the environment because someone else does. You should care about it ostensibly just because you think it's the right thing. You can't use someone else as a prop to justify it for you.
Yeah, but I think a lot of environmentalists, at least the ones I know here in Edmonton, are attuned to the sort of nuances of the conversation, right? Like,
I mean, it's the side I support, so I'm mainly just picking at it here for journalistic thoroughness.
Yeah, no, certainly. I guess there's also the way Alberta separatists or their sympathizers talk about Alberta. There is, and this goes way back, right? Because the sort of the prairie provinces didn't have control over their lands and natural resources until 1930, right? When the federal Liberals signed the Natural Resources Transfer Agreement, which now the AFN is talking about challenging because it totally ran roughshod over treaty rights. They didn't consult First Nations when they're like, okay, provinces that we created, now you have jurisdiction over these lands and resources. But the fact that for the first 25 years as a province, Alberta didn't have control over its resources, or what it regards as its resources, has led to this like long-term resentment against these sort of elites in Ottawa who are seen by many in Alberta as like having a colonial relationship with the province. And you've had Danielle Smith say that First Nations are treated the exact same way by Ottawa as we are, ignoring a lot of other
citation
things.
Needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so Wildcat talks about how like the separatist movement and its enablers or sympathizers in the provincial government are trying to be buddies with First Nations, but they're not actually interested in what Indigenous peoples have to say, right? They're using them as a prop too. Yeah, Danielle Smith has herself claimed to be indigenous.
That was an interesting
Um,
part of this piece. I didn't realize that she was a pretendian.
yeah, this goes back. So this is kind of a funny story. So I'm sure you know about the 2012 election and the Lake of Fire and Alan Huntsberger and that sort of tanking the Wild Rose campaign.
Hmm.
And that's become like sort of like a shorthand for, the Smith being this, self-proclaimed libertarian. Now that she's in power, we can see that she's, I mean, the most authoritarian premier in our lifetimes, but not being willing to like stand up to like the social conservatives beyond saying, well, I disagree with them, but they're entitled to their opinion, right?
Right.
But there was another there, but it wasn't just the Huntsberger stuff. There was also a guy in Calgary named Ron Leach, or Dr. Ron Leach, as Danielle Smith liked to call him, because he has some fake PhD from like a fake university. And Ron Leach gave this interview, and it came out the same week as the Lake of Fire stuff, which was the last week of the 2012 election. And he gave an interview on this multicultural radio station in Calgary, saying that you should vote for me because I have an advantage as a Caucasian person because I can speak for the entire community. Whereas, if you're Punjabi, you can only speak for Punjabi members of the community. If you're Black, you can only speak for Black members of the community. But as a white person, I can speak for everyone. Right. And yeah. And that was another controversy that the Wild Rose campaign had to deal with. And Nenshi, who was the mayor of Calgary at the time, now he's the NDP leader, and
small world.
Yeah, and went to the University of Calgary with Danielle Smith and Ezra Levant and others. He made a big fuss about this. This was actually the candidate in his riding that he lived in. He's like, this is clearly racist. And him and Smith spoke on the phone, and he kind of explained to her why that was so problematic. And then the next day she holds this press conference and she's just completely defiant. She surrounded herself with dozens of like Black and brown supporters of the Wild Rose, and she's saying that if anyone needs to apologize, it's Allison Redford and the PCs for accusing me of being racist. I'm biracial. I have Cherokee ancestry, so I know racism when I see it. And this isn't something she's talked about a lot. Right? She isn't. It's not like Thomas King, right? Whose whole
I'm not racist. I'm part Cherokee is like one of the old classics of racism.
Yeah, it is a classic, but it's like it wasn't like a key part of her identity. She wasn't going around in like being I'm indigenous all the time. It wasn't like Thomas King.
Just only when you needed to deflect from a charge of racism.
Yeah, exactly. Which I would argue makes it even worse, because I do think Thomas King thought he was indigenous, and I think Danielle Smith also, like, I think her parents did. Her mom, I believe it's her mom's side of the family. I think that that is not uncommon in settler families in the States to be like, oh yeah, you're like great grandparent.
And that's not good.
No, it's not. It's not. Absolutely. But
the fact that after killing all the indigenous people, these settlers are like, actually, we have their blood within us. Like, so much wrong going on there.
Yeah. And so that's another sort of way, like Wildcat talks about how the sort of the separatist movement sort of on the one hand, he says it like undermines the ability of indigenous peoples to make collective statements or speak with representative authority, because we don't know who is or isn't indigenous, right? But also undermines like these internal debates within indigenous communities, because there's a tendency to bury any sort of disagreements. I will say a friend of mine here in Edmonton, Danielle Parody, who was a reporter with APTN. He like totally debunked Smith's claims to having indigenous ancestry. She went to like a genealogist. She a really great piece of reporting she did a few years ago, a Cherokee genealogist, and they sort of established and analyzed Smith's family tree, and there's no Cherokee ancestry here. And uh and so yeah, I mean I guess the point that Wildcat was making was that there is like an immediate threat, not just by separatism itself, where you can say, well, if the separatism referendum it loses, or if the Clarity Act kicks in and it doesn't actually happen, this movement itself is a threat to indigenous rights in Alberta, and as a result, across Canada.
Because of the cultural shift. They're trying to create a new cultural attitude that indigenous people do not have rights, that the treaties are not valid, and that cultural shift, the mass popular shift, would then impact the ability of government to act, or even willingness to actually uphold the Constitution as written and intended.
Yes, exactly.
Well, that's not good.
No.
Nope. Well, that's depressing, but also important to keep abreast of, and that reporting is very appreciated. Folks, don't go anywhere. We will be back shortly with our guest Jeremy Appel from Read the Orchard, with our back half and our 3 headline topics of the week. See you in a sec. Today's episode of It's Getting Pretty Late with Jake Landau is brought to you by me. Folks, all of my work is available for free with no paywall at jakelandau.ca. But in order to keep writing and recording, I need money, because money is what makes this show go round. So, if you enjoy my content or find it informative, please consider a paid subscription at jakelandau.ca/subscribe. And please leave a 5-star rating on the show in your favorite podcast app, be it Apple, Spotify, or a secret third thing. Thank you, and enjoy the show. And we are back from a break with our guest Jeremy Appel and our 3 headline topics of the week. Our first one from the Canadian Press Wire Service. Conservative motion would force House vote on Alberta pipeline agreement. The federal Conservatives are planning to force vote in the House of Commons on Tuesday, so in just 2 days, on the Liberal government's pipeline agreement with Alberta. As the Conservatives are aware, and as you and I are aware as well, there's been a bit of a ruckus in the Liberal caucus because some of the people on the left, especially the environmentalists, are not happy about helping Alberta get around a bunch of environmental regulations. As you're aware, Stephen Guilbeault left cabinet over it, although he's still a member of the Liberal caucus. So what the Conservatives are doing to really try and widen that and make it any divisions within the Liberal Party more apparent is that they're bringing a motion to the floor on one of their opposition days to support the construction of a new pipeline and remove the Oil Tanker Moratorium Act. So I guess the idea here is to force Liberals to go on the record. If Liberals vote no, then Alberta will be unhappy because it'll seem like going back on the deal with Danielle Smith. But if Liberals vote yes, then environmentalists will be unhappy. I guess the idea is to create some more public disagreement within the Liberals than there is right now. Jeremy, I guess my question for you is, do you think it'll be an effective strategy for the Tories?
Yeah, I'm not sure how effective it will be because, I mean, first of all, it's going to pass, right? Like the Conservatives support it and the Liberal cabinet supports it. And I mean, I have the math in front of me, but that should be enough. And certainly there are Liberal backbenchers who support it as well. I think we know which liberals are against it. It's not exactly a secret. Guilbeault is one. Will Greaves, I know in Victoria, has spoken against it. And there's this liberal environment caucus that came into existence within the past year. um I presume they would all be against it. And again, I think the yeah, I think the conservatives are trying to expose something that isn't a secret, and that is a proportion of the liberal caucus doesn't support this agreement. And I think that actually helps the liberals, because it's like, see, we're a big tent. We're a party that can uh have disagreements and still get the job done of destroying the planet.
As a
And
former liberal and now thankfully independent federally who focus on writing about politics rather than being involved in it, the liberal appeal of the big tent is typically, from my experience, that you're able to find common ground on things and work toward common goal. That's generally how they manage to keep the tent together without both halves of the tent trying to kill each other. Like, the problem here is that there really is no common ground. It's just a complete 180 that a lot of people are unhappy with. I know there are a lot of voters, like for the Bloc, for the Greens, for the NDP, who held their nose and voted Liberal this time because they thought, under the context of Donald Trump, that they had to. And I do not think those votes are going the same way again. The next, if I don't think that it's impressive how much Carney has managed to like completely destroy what little environmentalist bona fides he had. And it's not like he had that much, but he was at least pretending.
well, I mean, as far as like bankers go, I would say, he had quite a few environmental bona fides. I mean,
but for the bankers, the bar is in hell.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a very low
for a
bar.
banker. Having any moral conviction immediately puts you in the top 5% of human beings in that profession.
But he was the climate banker, right? That was like a central part of his brand. Anyways, that's all over now. I think, regardless of this sort of theatrics that the conservatives are engaging in, that these NDP voters, maybe in some cases Bloc voters, Green voters who held their nose and voted Liberal, I don't think they're going to vote for the Liberal next election, regardless. No. I think that's quite clear. And I mean, the Conservatives know that the better the NDP does, the better their chances are of winning, right? Because again, if you look at the popular vote in this past election, the Conservatives got a greater percentage of the vote than Harper ever did. Which is why I think Poilievre is going to stick around. And despite some voices in the party that want him to go, similar to Smith, I think they're just really loud, and that at the end of the day,
I agree.
They realize he just needs to stay the course,
yeah,
and have the NDP regain official party status, and we'll get a conservative government. And I just wanted to emphasize that no one will be to blame for that except for the Liberals,
right?
For betraying all these voters.
Well, if he runs in Carleton again, he probably gets his seat back, because the only reason he lost to Bruce Fanjoy was because of a bunch of public servants that were worried about losing their jobs. But now the Liberals have said, hey, you know how we said vote for us to protect your jobs? Pranked.
Yeah, but I think also another element of, like, I think that was definitely an element of it too. But it was the convoy, right? In Poilievre's support for the convoy. And I don't think people will forget about that in the Ottawa region anytime soon. So I think he's better off just staying in rural Alberta riding. He has, no connect. I mean, maybe he runs in Calgary because that's like his hometown, and that's also, most seats in Calgary are safe for the Conservatives, especially in South Calgary, and even the seats that Liberals hold, like Corey Hogan's seat. I don't think a Liberal has ever won 2 terms in Calgary. Right. Recently you had George Chahal, who was elected for 1 term. He lost, but Corey Hogan won in another riding. And I mean,
God
it was quite
always
close.
gives liberals a single seat in Alberta to tempt them into doing stupid shit in the hope of winning more.
Yeah, well, I mean, they have 2 now, right? They also have Eleanor Olchinski in Edmonton Center.
Oh, yeah. I was
And
thinking of Calgary.
yeah, it's really Calgary where, yeah, I mean, Edmonton is generally a more progressive city. They've got a safe NDP seat now in Edmonton Strathcona. The riding I'm in is like flips between conservative and NDP, and then you have Edmonton Center, which flips between conservative and liberal. Although in 2021 it was a pretty close 3-way race with the NDP candidate not far behind in 3rd place.
Yeah, the
But
NDP are a fairly respectable contender in Edmonton. Like, even if it's not one of the safe seats, they'll always be fairly competitive.
Yeah. And that's because, of course, that's where the Alberta NDP,
right.
I mean, they have every seat there provincially. And even when they had, you go back to 2008 when they had 2 seats, both of those were in Edmonton, right? And that's like sort of their base. But yeah, I mean, it's, I think we both know exactly what the conservative strategy is here, but I'm not sure they're going to be telling people anything they don't already know.
Well, no, but I mean, the conservative strategy also seems it's not revealing new truths. It's just repetition, repetition, repetition. It's a strategy that works. Like, if you want people to get your message, beat it into their head. And I guess less than expose anything, I guess it's just more of an opportunity for Polyev to cause a ruckus, embarrass somebody, make the liberals. You get what I mean? It's like it's more to cause trouble for the liberals and annoy them. It's to get their goat.
Yeah, which I do think is also like that is really a defining feature of the sort of new right as opposed to the old new right, the sort of neoconservative,
trolling people, institutional, owning them.
Yeah, it's very opposition, very contrarian, very much about just naked exercise of power. Of course, when you're not in power, you can't just exercise power, but you can still trigger the libs. And yeah, I think that this is definitely
like a high school bully never became a true adult man.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the very least, it'll entertain me and give me a column to write about, so that'll be fun. Moving on to our second headline topic of the week, from CBC News, from Catherine Tunney in the Politics Bureau. Bloc says Liberals fear backlash from removing religious exemptions in hate speech law. The committee chair says the meeting was cancelled because emotions were running high. So, in Bill C9, which is the Combating Hate Act, which pro-Palestine people, including me, are not happy about because it would create bubble zones around places that would essentially abrogate the right to protest under the Charter, which is not cool. However, the Bloc have got an amendment added into the law, which I actually do like a little bit and find pretty funny. And now there's a bit of fight. And now, even though the Conservatives supported the original bill, now they're opposing this new version because it's done topsy-turvy. But the amendment would say that there's currently a criminal code exemption under hate speech laws because as Canadians know, we have laws against hate speech in this country, but there's an exemption if, in good faith, the person expressed or attempted to establish by an argument an opinion on a religious subject or an opinion based on a belief in a religious text. So, what does that mean? If I were to say we should kill all gay people, that would be illegal and I could go to jail for hate speech. But if I were to say we should kill all gay people because the Bible told me so, somehow that's fully legal and okay, which is fucking stupid. So the Bloc has introduced an amendment into Bill C-9, which would remove that exemption. And as a result, you would no longer be able to use religion as an excuse to discriminate on the basis of race, religion, like all these things. And I like that, because as a queer guy, I kind of resent the fact that people can, say all this blatantly illegal hate speech that would normally be blatantly illegal, and then they're like, oh, it's okay though, God told me you're not human. What do you think about it, Jeremy?
Yeah, well, it reminds me of the the Lake of Fire stuff that I referred to earlier in the Wild Rose 2012 election campaign, right? That was Smith's whole thing too. She was like, look, guy's a pastor. When he said that, he was speaking as a pastor, not as a candidate for office. We're not gonna legislate on these issues, but he's entitled to his opinion. And it's like, well, do you want a government with people like that in it? Because again, she could have just said, well, if he wins, which he wasn't going to anyways because it was in Edmonton, he won't be able to sit in our caucus. And she wouldn't do that, even though her advisors, including people like Tom Flanagan, told her to dissociate from him because it wasn't worth it. They weren't going to gain anything from it. But she had other people whispering in her ear, no, that actually you need to stand by him. So that reminds me of that. But it is interesting because, as you noted, this is a very shoddy piece of legislation from its inception and should just be scrapped. But it's interesting seeing the mechanics of a minority government work here, where you have the conservatives teaming up with liberals to, suppress protest of, events selling real estate in the illegally occupied West Bank.
Or even worse, events where you just have soldiers who came right back from Gaza talking about how they're all the war crimes they committed against Palestinian children and how you should go join and do it too.
Yeah, in that it's all lies, but also is all justified.
Right. We're not exaggerating here, folks. We both grew up having these things thrust in our faces. It wasn't fun.
Yeah. It like the worst of it is true. I think it's hard for a lot of people from outside of the community to comprehend.
And I get that, because like people don't want to go. I get why Goyim don't want to like go full out of pocket at a synagogue, but no, sometimes they are doing bad shit there, and we aren't happy about it either.
Yeah, it's interesting because when those protests first started happening, like I was skeptical. I didn't think it was a good idea because of the optics, because it allowed these pro-Israel groups to say, oh my God, they are protesting synagogues. They are stopping Jews from praying. But I was wrong. I mean, there were a lot of questions being asked. And even places like the National Post, I remember reading one column there. I forget who wrote it. And they actually spoke with one of the organizers of the protest. And in the column, it's quite clear that this is an event selling real estate in, they would call it disputed territory, but in occupied territory. So it actually had, I think, these protests are working in that they're leading people to ask questions. Why are why are houses of worship hosting these sorts of events? Why are they even
allowed? If the protests weren't working, right? They wouldn't try and stop them.
Exactly. And it's not just, that has been sort of the most, prominent example in recent years. But I mean, there are also some like really shady, like Hindu nationalist, events with, like BJP politicians who have a lot of blood on their hands being invited to these these Hindu temples that Sikh groups are protesting, right? And you see when you pay attention to the sort of Hindutva movement, there's a lot they borrow a lot from Zionism. They've learned a lot
There's a lot of
about how to
mutual
weaponize.
exchange. There's a
Yeah,
reason.
exactly.
There's a reason Netanyahu and Modi get along so well.
Yeah, and I mean, India gets its largest weapons supplier is Israel,
Right.
Which Nehru is tossing in his grave, but
India is also apparently shipping off their last 2,000 Indian Jews to Israel, and I'm like, why do they have to go? Why?
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Why are they not welcome?
I mean,
why are they not still welcome there? Are you guys not a good place?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. These ethno-nationalist movements, whether it's Zionism or Hindutva, in others, it's this idea that no, actually the state belongs to this specific group of people, and everyone else.
I'm now thinking of like the concept of like mutual deportations, where it's like we'll send you your people, you send us our people.
Well, I mean that's essentially what happened in partition with India, right? Hindus were expelled from Pakistan, and Muslims were expelled from India. India's of course much bigger.
Well, it's good that nobody died, right?
Yeah.
God.
Yeah. No, and it's good that it's all been settled, and
and no one in India.
It's not like
Pakistan
both countries have nuclear weapons.
And don't ask what country with a maple leaf on their flag gave India the technology for nuclear weapons, because then Canada might not look too good.
Oh yeah, I guess when did India develop its nukes? In the 90s? It was like relative, or 80s?
It was in after the 50s, after we built and gave them their first nuclear reactor.
Right. Okay,
and
so
then they
Pakistan
used that
developed its nukes later.
Yeah. We started selling reactors to Pakistan after, because we felt bad, pretty much.
Oh, nice.
This is actually may genuinely be the worst thing that Canada has ever done to the world.
Yeah, well, playing both sides, right? So you come out on top. Classic.
I don't know that we're coming out on top. I think we just did something really stupid.
Yeah, well, temporarily, right? Temporary gain, certainly. But yeah, so this legislation sucks. And it's interesting seeing, the conservatives support it. And then the bloc is like, hold on, we'll support it if you make it slightly less shitty. I mean, again,
and because the government has like a strong minority where they're close to the threshold, they can abandon a deal with one party to go to a deal with a different caucus. And that could even happen between readings. You could get support from the conservatives on first reading, and then after the amendments, you could get support from the bloc on the next reading.
Right. And you saw that with the budget, right? Like, because their minority is so large, right? They're like 2 seats away from majority. They got Elizabeth May, or 3 seats away from majority. I can't remember. But anyways, they got Elizabeth May. They lied to Elizabeth May, said, yeah, we're not going to allow carbon capture to be used, sequestered carbon to be used for enhanced oil recovery. And then they signed this MOU with Danielle Smith saying that actually you can use it for enhanced oil recovery. And then I think, was it Dawn Davies who abstained? A couple New Democrats abstained.
There were 2 New Democrats who abstained, and one of them initially had voted no before they told her to change her vote and abstain. And then she gave a speech to the news like she was always planning to abstain. It was I wrote a column about this. It was incredibly stupid. You had
was that Jenny Kwan?
I don't remember. I don't know. All I know is that both the NDP and conservatives had people waiting in the wings to see how many people needed to abstain versus how many could then register a no vote, like to make sure it was just enough to pass. It was the worst piece of bullshit theater in a long time.
Yeah. Certainly. Yeah, so I mean, again, it's interesting seeing how like parliamentary democracy works, right? Because in the States, that wouldn't be unusual. You'd have people, you might have liberals vote against the budget, and conservatives vote for it,
Yeah, the
right? If it was
Americans
like
have
an American
very
style.
weak party discipline. Like, to the
Yeah.
point of absurdity, where you have people like Henry Cuellar, who are like anti abortion people who get pardoned of crimes by the Republican president. And then the Democrats are like, he's one of us still, we think.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, it's
Yeah.
way.
I mean, America not a model to do it,
No,
but I
they're
think in that
they're at
case,
the
it's
other
actually,
extreme of Canadian politics. So take a happy medium on party discipline.
yeah, but I think that's like the party discipline stuff, and that's I think one of the points that the Reform Party had that I thought was quite good, and where they're seizing on something that was like real and using it to sort of put sort of this post-partisan sheen on very ideological um, reactionary agenda, was by talking about like grassroots democracy and referendums and recalls, which we're seeing now in Alberta. The Danielle Smith, who has always supported recall legislation, going back to when she was a Calgary Herald columnist, now
Until it
saying, "Whoa,
was
whoa,
used
whoa."
against her caucus.
Yeah, she was like, "Whoa, that's," and you saw Jason Kenney told the Canadian Press the other day, um, who because he was the one who introduced this law to try and I think appease the sort of more rural, like populist right that was a big part of the UCP coalition when they were mad at him for COVID restrictions. It was just like, we're letting the people decide. We're putting the people in charge. If they feel that they're not being represented adequately, then they ought to be able to, uh, you know, they shouldn't have to wait 4 years to get rid of their representative. And now he's saying, whoa, 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 that was not the intention. When what we were talking about was like severe misconduct.
We were
And
talking
it's
about
like,
getting rid of NDP people.
yeah. And I went and I read through the legislation, and it doesn't actually have any, it doesn't lay out any specific circumstances in which a recall would be warranted. It's just like, yeah, you collect signatures, and if you get enough signatures in this amount of time, then it goes to a vote. And Smith was the one who decided to give people more time to collect signatures and decrease the amount of signatures they need to collect. And now she's facing a recall petition in her own riding, Brooks Medicine Hat, which she lives nowhere near. And I don't, I know one of the people, I know a couple of the people who are involved in this like recall campaign, and I've been meaning to, I'm interested in what their strategy is, because
I'm interested in just hearing from them in general.
Yeah, because the people I know who are involved with the recall stuff aren't NDP partisans. Right. Like, so their goal isn't just to replace these UCP people with New Democrats, though that would be the effect of it. But more broadly, I'm wondering, is their goal to just take away the UCP like majority and maybe like turf the premier in the process? Or are they just trying to cause a headache for the UCP? Because I don't think, I'm not convinced, and maybe I'm wrong, that they're actually going to. I think a lot of them aren't going to get enough signatures to go to a by-election.
But it's fun entertainment.
I think those that do aren't. I mean, if the goal is to just embarrass and cause a headache for the UCP, then I think it's a good way of doing that, because it already is having its.
If we can get back on the topic of this story, though,
just recalls and party discipline.
Going a bit off there, but on this one, the important thing though is that while these amendments were put forward at committee, The latest committee meeting was canceled unilaterally by James Maloney, the Liberal committee chair, who said that emotions were running high and he wanted to calm things down. But the main thrust of this story here is that the Bloc is now saying that the Liberals are backing away from what they agreed to with the Bloc on that amendment because they're afraid of backlash. So they were working with the Conservatives in part. Now they're not. They were working with the Bloc in part. Now they're not. They don't seem to know what they're doing with this bill. There are parts of it I really don't like. This amendment I do like, but who knows if that amendment will still be in there. Do the Carney Liberals actually know what they're doing in a minority parliament, even with one with this many seats as they do?
Yeah, that's a good question. It does seem like Carney is trying to govern like he has a majority. I mean, he's quite close to having a majority. Right, in terms of just the sort of being very cavalier about putting forward very contentious legislation and just sort of seeing where the cards fall. Again, he's not an experienced politician, which was, I think, an asset for him when he came into politics after people had grown really tired of Trudeau. But yeah, it's interesting. Because I don't like. I mean, this legislation, it's also like something that you can just leave to municipalities, right? I mean, Toronto had their own bubble legislation. Calgary's had one since before the genocide, which was intended to protect libraries from being protested by anti-trans freaks.
Right.
And I knew at that point, I was like, this is going to get weaponized, against Palestine supporters. But I mean, again, I am sympathetic to protecting public spaces from that, are providing, safe spaces for trans people or whatever from these, far right loons. But yeah, I mean, it does seem like this federal legislation wasn't really thought through, that it was like something essentially CJA asked for. NCCM, as I understand it, is also not against this sort of thing.
Although they're both upset now about the Bloc amendment, funny enough.
Yeah. And
in which case, who is the bill for? If the people it was written for are unhappy, the people it's written against are obviously unhappy, and it's who knows?
Yeah, I think it is reflective of this delicate balancing act the Liberals, especially in minority parliament, but just in general, even when they have a majority, to keep their really broad coalition together. They sort of have to twist themselves into knots sometimes, it seems like. But it's interesting because they could have just passed legislation as is with support from the Conservatives. I mean, it's probably unconstitutional anyways. And I'm wondering if that's a consideration in, willing to sort of dance with the Bloc now, that legal considerations making it harder to challenge in court. Again, I'm not a lawyer, let alone a constitutional lawyer, so I don't know if this actually mitigates that. But then there's a cynical part of me that is like, maybe the Liberals just want to blow it up, and but in that case, then they wouldn't be again, if then they in the Bloc both vote for it, it passes, though. I mean, there could be, perhaps there was a risk that if they did the original version with the Conservatives, that some Quebec Liberals, of which there are many, would sit out or vote against it. So that could also be another factor. But yeah, I don't know what's going through Mark Carney's mind, or I guess Sean Fraser is the minister that is like taking the lead on this, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah. So
yeah, they seem to all be spinning the wheels around there. They're having a bit of trouble.
yeah. So yeah, it'll be I'm interested to see how it plays out. Again, it's lousy legislation. I think it should be scrapped. Regardless, um, let municipalities figure it out, and let them, face. I believe Toronto is, the bubble legislation in Toronto is being challenged in court. Is that understanding correct?
I don't remember. All I know is I don't know that it's exactly being enforced anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think that, yeah.
Yeah,
Let me Google
you've
that.
still got people protesting outside the same places. It's not being enforced, so or at least if it's being enforced, I haven't seen it.
Yeah, the Civil Liberties Association launched a charter challenge against. They launched it against Vaughn's actually.
Yeah, Vaughan, not
Uh,
Toronto. Vaughan, because Vaughan did one earlier, I think.
wow, and also this is McDonald Laurier Institute published commentary saying that these laws are unconstitutional
Hmm,
and shouldn't happen. And I mean, if you
good
got
for
the
them.
McDonald Laurier Institute,
Yeah, they're not exactly
um,
left.
yeah, I mean, and they're not exactly, the Civil Liberties Association is one thing, but I mean, McDonald Laurier Institute, I don't think anyone's accusing them of being libertarian, but yeah, in this piece written by someone by the name of Christine Van Gen, Geyn. I don't know how that's pronounced. It could be, I don't, but who is a lawyer. They do bring up the Calgary sort of precedent, and um how that it
Yeah,
is
yeah,
it essentially stops their guys from exercising free speech,
yeah,
right? And that they don't want to do that.
yeah,
So
yeah. Okay, moving on to our final topic of the day here, because I believe we have set a new record for longest episode of this podcast. From the Calgary Herald, written by Bill Kaufman. Our local story. Calgary to Banff rail proponents submit plan for federal major project status. We can't help but be optimistic. It checks off the boxes, has so many benefits, not just for the communities along the route, but for the country, said Jan Waterous. The idea of a train from Calgary's airport to Banff is a popular one. Obviously, Banff is a popular tourist destination. People fly into Calgary, and being able to get people between there in high volume without needing to use cars would be good for the environment. It would be good for people that do not drive. It would be a useful place to put a train in general. So the fact that Alberta is trying to move along a train on this route as one of their major projects, good thing. I support it. Just one problem. Instead of an electric train or even a normal gas-powered train like a diesel, which is actually better for the environment than everyone taking a separate electric car, especially with new Tier 4 locomotives. And Via Rail's current trains are diesel trains, and they're very, very clean. You honestly can't even tell that they're putting anything out into the air. But instead of picking either of these proven technologies, which have sold many, many, many trains around the world, Alberta is going in on hydrogen trains. Hydrogen trains are powered by hydrogen fuel cells, and hydrogen is being proposed as a solution to transition off oil and gas and fossil fuels, that it is an alternative, and that it's better than electric trains. There's just one little thing. They're saying that it's a better alternative to oil and gas because green hydrogen, the only byproduct is just water. The problem is the vast majority of hydrogen made, Jeremy, is not green hydrogen. It's blue
Mhm.
hydrogen. And you wouldn't believe what popular industry in Alberta produces blue hydrogen as a byproduct of their extraction.
Oh, I know very well. I went to the hydrogen conference last year here in Edmonton, which happens here. They've got the hydrogen conference and then the carbon capture conference, and they're both are, and they've also, I think, have some like small modular nuclear reactor conferences as well here. And both are things that like carbon capture, green hydrogen doesn't exist
No. I-
on the scale needed to use it as
no,
a
the
meaningful
if
source of fuel.
any hydrogen is accessible to you, like the vast majority, like more than like 95% is blue hydrogen made from as a byproduct from the extraction of fossil fuels. So essentially, Jeremy,
Right, and that's
for
why it's linked to
yeah,
carbon
right,
capture, right?
right,
Because you take the sequestered carbon and you make it into hydrogen. Um,
right. So, Jeremy, for our no prize question of the week, for pointing out the obvious, uh, do you believe that hydrogen is a way to get off oil and gas if it fundamentally still requires extracting oil and gas?
no, it doesn't, and that's
No
why
is the
the oil and
correct
gas industry
answer.
and that's why the oil and
Congratulations.
gas industry loves it, right? Because it's like carbon capture. It's a delay tactic, that allows them to keep on drilling for as long as they can, and that's their goal.
Right.
Whether it's your Synovus or CNRL that will at least rhetorically say, oh yeah, we're going to be net zero by 2050, or you're a smaller producer who thinks that like climate change is like a globalist conspiracy. Um the goal is the same, and that's to
It's a delay tactic.
drill as much as
Yeah.
possible
But what
while you
really
still can.
frustrates me about hydrogen powered trains and vehicles, like, which are a niche product that do not have like established like supply lines, is that for one, like, there's, even if hydrogen power was a legitimate thing, it still would not make sense for the train itself to be hydrogen driven. You like I For one, if hydrogen requires fossil fuel extraction, then it should just be a diesel train, which exists in large quantity, which you can actually get serviced and repaired by the company that makes it because they sell hundreds of them and not two of them. Uh, but if hydrogen even was useful as like baseload power, then you would use it on the baseload and just have an electric train which gets electricity from that baseload power. There's no reason to have explosive flammable hydrogen inside a passenger vehicle.
Yeah, yeah, it's again, I mean, of course, as you noted, passenger rail from Calgary downtown to Banff is a good thing. I mean, public transit is good, but and the UCP last year, I believe it was, released this sort of um rail master plan
Yes, I
that
believe I called it the
envisions.
one thing Danielle Smith does that I agree with her on.
Yeah, she's for some reason has been very always been like a very strong supporter of building more
She
trains.
just really likes trains.
Her husband, who's a former, he was her producer when she was a TV host on Global 20 years ago. And then he worked for Sun News, and then she became leader of opposition, and he bought
He
a
had the
restaurant.
restaurant in the old train car, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And they still have it. They
Yeah.
can't sell it. They've
Oh,
been
yeah.
having trouble selling it.
Hmm.
I went there once. It was actually quite good. And me and my friend were speaking loudly um, about Danielle Smith, and one of the people who were working there said to us, "Don't worry, she has nothing to do with this,"
Yeah.
which was
that's
great.
that's funny. But like I remember,
But
like she was in Japan the other month this year, and she's just like, "I'm traveling aboard the Hokuriku Shinkansen to Sapporo," and I'm like, "Good for you!" Like, why she's living? That's the life I want to be living. Like,
but I can tell you why she likes public transit, and that's because business wants it. And it's not like her priority is getting a rail line from the airport to Calgary to Banff,
right,
right? Right. The Green Line, which has been, the big transit, LRT expansion in Calgary that they've been working on forever. That she's been throwing wrenches in that and forcing them to change it because I mean the goal is and that's what business wants, right? They want people from Texas or wherever to be able to fly to Calgary and then just hop on a train like you have in Toronto
right.
to go from the airport to their hotel downtown,
But
right?
to be honest, it's
um
sort of just what I expect out of any city with an airport. You shouldn't need to rent a car when you're visiting a place, and
yeah.
you should have a place that's easy for people to visit.
Yeah, I mean the goal for Calgary and Edmonton is to get a train to the airport eventually,
Yeah,
but the priority that city councils in both those cities have made is building out transit within the city so that
right.
people in like underserved, often working class, racialized areas can move around the city more conveniently, which should be the priority. Now, with the Calgary Banff Rail, there's also another aspect to this. And I was wondering when you sent me the list of topics and you sent me this one, because I've done some reporting on this. I did some reporting on this a few years
Hmm.
ago. Because the story that you sent, the Herald piece, mentions Adam and Jan Wadris of Lyricon Capital. Um, and it also notes that they own the train station in Banff, and I don't remember if it notes that they also own a ski resort in Banff. And since the Kenny during the Kenny premiership, they had been pushing very hard for the provincial government to give them, I believe it is $30 million a year over 50 years to operate and build this train from Calgary to Banff that would get them more business. Kenny was a huge proponent of it, and in fact, Adam Wadris was at one point appointed to the board of Invest Alberta, which sort of was this crown corporation designed to sort of make these like big like investment decisions to attract international capital to the province. And so Kenny was on board. It was very contentious in his cabinet because, again, this guy who's pushing for it sat on the board of Invest Alberta and would benefit greatly from provincial subsidies for it. And so it kind of just fizzled out as Kenny, was consumed by infighting within his party. And the strategy and there are two pieces I co-wrote for the progress report with Duncan Kinney on this a few years ago. And so because the province was stalling on making this like massive funding commitment for this pet project, they decided to take the approach of advocating for the feds to do certain things that would make something like this more feasible, right, for people to use. For example, by increasing the entrance fee for people who enter Banff by car, right, to sort of incentivize them to use transit. And so, which is, I mean, it's good to incentivize people to use transit. That's the tricky thing with this. But it's also the person advocating it is someone with like a blatant conflict of interest,
Right.
right? Who
But I'm
had
good, Jeremy. I'm going to be fully honest with you. I respect the fact that he has a conflict of interest and that his business will likely profit from this. I also just don't care. Like it's a good
yeah,
train, and everyone agrees it should be there. So just build it. Like, if we're gonna limit, yeah, some private business will benefit from it, but also the public will benefit from it. And if private businesses benefit from having public infrastructure, okay. Like, if it was only
Well, yeah, I
solely
mean
for
that,
the
and that's
benefit
part of
of
the point of
yeah,
it, right?
yeah. If it was
But
only for
but
private
it's just
business, then it would be one thing.
yeah. Um, but I mean, again, I think I take your point, and I think that is a fair point. And yeah, of course, I think having a train from Calgary to Banff would be good. I think having a train from Calgary's airport to downtown to Banff would also be good.
From Calgary to
But
Edmonton would be great.
oh, I mean that is something that has been needed for a very long time with Stop and Red Deer. I mean, uh um
I mean, in the 90s, Via
but
Rail cut service to Calgary altogether, from my knowledge.
yeah, that sounds right. I mean, V-Rail has for a long time been quite negligent of Western Canada, and just being like, oh well, Greyhound will do it, and then you saw what happened with Greyhound. But to me, again, you can't look at this outside the context of running roughshod over municipal governments, right, in Calgary and Edmonton, who've clearly identified as like an immediate priority building out their municipal light rail transit networks.
I mean, it's
And
a
then,
different thing though, because this is intercity transit. It's a different scale, and it is what the provincial government should be focusing on.
well, but the province funds the intercity rail as do the feds, right? And that's why the Green Line was ready to go ahead. Um, right? Trudeau committed funding to it. Once Trudeau committed funding, Kenny was like, "Yeah, okay, fine, I'll do it too." And then Smith comes in, and she's like, "Actually, we're going to change this as a
It
condition of our funding. You're going to
Admittedly,
have to."
you may not like this, but I agreed with Smith canceling the initial Green Line plans because they were not good plans. They would have been a low floor tram line essentially, and that's not the kind of density on a transit line that they need. I would argue that they would be much better served by higher order transit like a metro line, like elevated rail.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, they should build a SkyTrain. Why
Yeah,
not?
that's exactly what I mean. It's like
Yeah.
I can fully understand the province not necessarily wanting to commit to the Green Line when it isn't a. I mean, the just today and after we finish recording, I'm going to be going out to cover it in Toronto. The Finch West LRT
Oh,
opened,
yeah.
and
I was reading
people
that. Yeah.
people are already complaining because it's going at about like 10 kilometers an hour. It's very slow. It's stopping at every. People are essentially wondering, why did we build a streetcar and make it this like big thing and spend all that money on it? And there's something to be said for it. Isn't I get that, individual municipalities want their autonomy, but at the same time, sometimes the plans they make are just terrible, and I'm not going to complain too much if the end result is good infrastructure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, fair enough. And you're the transit guy here, right?
Yeah,
So
I'm
I
getting a
do,
bit too. I can get a bit too into the niche woods on it, but like it's when we spend like billions and billions of dollars on these projects, I understand why we want to make sure we pick the right modality, the right routing, and you don't. When it's too local, the planning, you can have NIMBYs like saying, "Oh, it can't be on this street; it needs to be one street over," and the end result is a station that's completely inaccessible to most people walking.
mhm.
Yeah, but yeah,
Yeah.
nonetheless, I do have things to criticize about the provincial government's handling of public transit. Case in point, hydrogen trains.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is very concerning. Um, detail of it, and and I knew when Smith announced this plan for like inter-provincial transit, I was like, there's gonna be a catch, you know what I
Oh,
mean?
I knew there was
Like
going to be a catch, but I was just hoping that it would just be a diesel train, which I'm fine with. Like, I already said it, but I don't think people understand. Like, 100 people going in their electric cars to Banff versus 100 people going in one diesel train to Banff. The diesel train is better for the environment, especially in Alberta where that electricity is coming from oil and gas, anyways.
well, it's coming from gas,
Well,
but
yeah.
yeah. And now we'll be allowed to come from gas for the foreseeable future because of Carney's deal with Smith. But
They call
yeah,
him
I would just
McCartney
just
because he's running a circus.
my partner makes that joke all the time. Um, I uh um yeah, I just, for me, because as someone who is really diving deep into like Smith's sort of authoritarianism, and her like the sort of broader political agenda that she serves, that I don't think is necessarily like her own,
Right.
but is nonetheless, she's the public face of it. um I just feel like interfering in municipalities transit plans that they've studied a lot and voted on and democratically approved. I mean, it would be one thing if that was like a one-off, right? Like, obviously, like, municipalities are creatures of the province, right? um that is just the reality. But if you're doing it persistently and repeating it, you're doing it while you're passing legislation that makes it easier that empowers you to cancel municipal bylaws, to
Yeah.
target specific councillors for recall votes,
I want
to
trains that run
bring
on
corporate
time,
money
but
that,
it doesn't justify authoritarian takeover.
yeah. And again, so if we're talking about this in isolation, then yeah, sure, I mean, it's not a big deal. We can debate um the specifics of each transit
Right.
plan, and you know a lot more about that than I do, right?
Some would say I know too
But
much.
well, you know I think you know the right amount. But I think it's important to look at this in the context of this
Yeah.
very like strong arm of the state that Smith is using, um, and in conjunction not just with how the province relates to municipalities, but also now it's using the notwithstanding clause for everything and everything, which is sort of this Quebec envy that like Alberta separatists and separatist adjacent types, firewall agenda people like Stephen
Right.
Harper before he was prime
Yeah.
minister, have. um I can't help but see this as part of that broader
I
constellation.
guess
But
then
I
for our final fun question, uh, how likely do you think it'll be until she finds a way to use the notwithstanding clause on this train?
I mean,
Who
I don't
knows
think
what
she
for?
needs to.
Well,
Well, yeah, I mean, but the way
well, even if she
what was
doesn't
it?
need to, maybe she'll just do it for sport. I mean, Quebec put it on every bill for a while
Right, to
just
make
to
a
be
point.
special.
Yeah, I don't. It's interesting because Smith has these like two sides to her, right? Where on the one hand, she's this like really fiery, charismatic, really extreme right wing populist leader, right? Who is willing to wants to like stick it to the feds and stand up for the people against the elites, that type of stuff. But on the other hand, she is also very personable and very much and you saw this in her radio years, very much willing to talk to people she doesn't agree with. And yes, the terms of the conversation is always skewed one way or another. um and there's also like a more cooperative side to her, that I mean I think is I'm sort of just thinking out loud, and I'm still trying to work this out for the book, but I think um that a lot of that is like public relations, and but I mean she does have that history in corporate lobbying too, right? Where she will work with a government who to get what her clients want. Um and so so the notwithstanding clause serves a useful purpose for the former, but for the latter, um I don't, for at least to keep up this image that she has of being this very likable, personable figure. I don't see her using the notwithstanding clause when she doesn't need to. And so and I could be totally misreading. I mean, one thing about Smith, it's hard to analyze her, is she can be very unpredictable. And I'm sure Rob Anderson, who's her chief of staff, former Wild Rose MLA, who I think is like the real like ideologue here, who's like has the sort of vision. I'm sure I think he would love to just use the notwithstanding clause for anything and everything to make a point. But in this case, right, they don't need to, because the province has full control over municipalities if
Right.
it wants to.
I would
Municipalities only have
I
so much power as the province is
my
willing to
guess
give
would
them.
just be using it to indemnify them in case anyone walks across the tracks and gets hit.
Yeah, there's that. There's also the, can you pass the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act, which has pretty severe penalties for people who, they're thinking specifically of people blocking trail lines, right? Rail lines. This was when the protests were happening again with the in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en, who were trying to,
Right.
block that LNG pipeline, and then it ended up being used against the Coots blockaders, who Smith was a huge supporter of, by the way,
I
said she
don't
wanted
think
them to
there
win.
really needs to be any laws against people protesting on top of a rail line, because there's so little friction between the wheels and the steel rails that there's no hope of them stopping on time. And it's if you protest on top of rail tracks, you will probably die. And it won't be anyone's fault except your own, because they will not see you in time to be able to stop. Like it won't be out of spite. Like it's just physics. It's not a good place to protest.
Well, and that's the thing with a lot of these authoritarian right wing power grabs, is that generally there are already laws on the book that address the problem it purports to address,
It's just
right?
that the power they currently have still won't be enough for them.
Right. So it's to create just to give the state more authority,
Hmm.
right? And back in the Wild Rose days, I mean, Smith would talk about or at least the sort of Wild Rose property rights crowd would talk about that, because the actually Ted Morton, who's like sort of an intellectual godfather of the Wild Rose, but was a PC MLA. He's another one of the University of Calgary guys. Um, um, he passed this land use legislation that essentially introduced like regional land use planning in like conservation plans and stuff, but empowered the provincial government to just declare certain zones off limits for agricultural or resource development, and would enable them to essentially you know um, force people to not use the land that they own for the purposes that they want to, right? And Alberta's always on the books had legislation that allows it to confiscate land, right? But at the time, the Wilders people made the argument that, well, this just gives the government more power to do that, and there's a process under the original legislation that they had to go through, and this sort of abrogated that. And I mean, that legislation ended up getting toned down, but you know, and it, that I think also, and this is very tangential, but I think that also sort of shows the very like authoritarian, that when you put a libertarian in power, like they can say whatever they want when they're in opposition, but once libertarians come to power, I mean, there's like no one who's more authoritarian, because it's like, oh, now I have this state apparatus
No
under my control, and
libertarians
then
and foxholes.
yeah, I mean, they just become another neoliberal, where it's like, yeah, actually, I'm going to use the state to benefit private interests, and reduce its ability to care for people, but enhance its ability to protect private interests, which libertarians, even in theory, aren't opposed to, right? They support having a strong state to uh, protect private property, and to do law enforcement, and like strong military. It's just, other than that, it's completely hollowed out.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hopefully there won't be too much authoritarianism in building this train, because I do think it will be a good train. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining the program today, giving us an extra long episode for people to listen to at home. We really do appreciate it, and hopefully we'll have you back on again in the new year. For those listening at home, this is Jeremy Appel. You can read his book, Kennyism, at the library or wherever books are sold. And Jeremy, thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, always great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, sorry, I think I was extra rambly today.
No, we're good.
Just because I got Danielle Smith on the mind.
I know. All good.
All authoritarianism and all that.
Yeah. All right. Jeremy Appel, everybody. And that'll do it for this week's episode. Thanks once again to Jeremy Appel for joining the program. You can read his work at readtheorchard.ca, or you can read his book Kennyism again at the library, where I like to read books, or wherever books are sold. And remember, when you read books at the library, the author actually does get a cut, which is cool. Next week will be our final episode of the year. Thank you all so much for making this inaugural season such a success. But we are not quite done with you yet. It will be one more returning guest. I'm happy we are managing to get him in just before the end of the season. And we will be back in July after him. So see you next week on December 14th for our final episode of 2025. And then we will be seeing you in the wonderful futuristic year of 2026. Have a good night. This is the end of the show. Bye.